At my grandpa's 80th birthday party, my dad pulled me aside and told me, "You should leave before people find out you're still a failure." Hi, I'm Emma. I've spent my whole life being erased from my family's story. My parents ignored me, pushed me aside, and even cut me off completely. While my sister got everything, praise, love, support, I was the one left behind. But guess what? I didn't let them define me. I built my own life, my own success, without them. And now they want a piece of it. Ever been treated like you don't matter, only for people to come back when they see you've made it? I want to know, has your family ever pushed you aside, only to try and take credit later? Drop your story in the comments below. Let's talk about it. I always knew I was the backup plan, not the second act in a grand performance, just the quiet understudy no one expected to go on stage. My parents never said it outright, but they didn't have to. In our house, favoritism wasn't loud. It was methodical. I remember my 8th birthday. The living room was decorated with sagging blue balloons, more deflated than cheerful. On the coffee table sat a sheet cake from Costco, half vanilla, half chocolate, because everyone likes options, my mom said. Olivia got a mountain bike when she turned 8, a shiny red one with ribbons on the handles, and her name stickered across the seat. Me? I got a workbook on building better habits. I didn't even know what a habit was. That was the year I started to really notice the difference between us. Olivia's room had a bookshelf full of gold trophies, neat as a museum. Mine had half-colored sketches tacked up with painter's tape and a desk always cluttered with unfinished ideas. Olivia's piano lessons turned into recitals. My attempts at violin were quietly dropped after a semester. I thought maybe I just wasn't trying hard enough, so I tried. But trying in silence doesn't make noise, and in our house, only noise got attention. One afternoon, I was working on my math homework in the kitchen. I had gotten distracted drawing little cartoon birds in the margins. They were wearing tiny scarves. I thought they were funny. Dad didn't. "Emma," he said sharply, putting his coffee down with a thud, "math isn't art class." I snapped the notebook closed. He looked at me over his glasses. "You can't doodle your way through life." I wanted to ask if Olivia ever doodled, but I already knew the answer. A week later, Olivia won her school district's science fair. She designed a project about water purification using homemade charcoal. I didn't really understand it, but everyone else acted like she had cured something. Mom called the whole family. Dad rented a canopy and set up a backyard BBQ that Saturday. Even our neighbors came. I remember watching Olivia pose for photos under a banner that said, "So proud," in sparkly letters. She wore a white dress with no wrinkles. Dad stood next to her and straightened her collar, beaming. At the party, I helped carry lemonade pitchers and clean up paper plates. No one asked me if I had entered the fair. I had. But my project, a poster on different types of clouds, hadn't made it past the school round. When the school year ended, my report card came in, a mix of B's and C's, 1A in art. Mom read it while standing by the sink, then sighed. "You're bright, Emma," she said, "but you need to apply yourself." Dad didn't even look up from the newspaper. That night at dinner, they talked about Olivia's summer pre-college camp at Stanford. She'd just turned 14. I asked if I could take a weekend art class at the community center. Dad blinked slowly and said, "Let's focus on the basics first." He didn't say no, but we both knew what that meant. Grandpa George was there that night, sitting quiet in the corner like always. He wasn't much of a talker, but he saw things. After the dishes were cleared, he called me into the den. The room always smelled like old books and peppermint. "I got something for you," he said, handing me a small, weathered leather notebook. It fit right in my palm. "What's this?" I asked. "Somewhere to write what they won't hear," he said simply. It took me a second to understand, but then I nodded. At the next family dinner, we sat at the same long table in the dining room. Olivia at Dad's right hand, Mom across from him. I was near the end, next to the wall, half the dishes already picked over by the time they got to me. Dad was in a good mood, talking about a promotion he'd gotten at the university. Olivia had just scored in the 99th percentile on some national test. Mom kept beaming. I sat quietly, folding and refolding my napkin into triangles. At one point, Dad looked over at me and said, "Not everyone's meant to be exceptional. Some of us support from the background." No one flinched. No one defended me. Not even Mom. Olivia smiled a little. Later that night, I opened the leather notebook for the first time. I stared at the blank page for a while. Then I picked up my pencil and wrote, "One day, I'll speak louder than their silence." They didn't need to slam the door behind me. They just stopped opening it altogether. The thing about being pushed out isn't always about shouting or suitcases. Sometimes it's just silence, the kind that sinks in slow. When I got my acceptance letter to Portland State University, I stared at it for 10 full minutes. My name was right there. Emma Walker, printed in black ink, a welcome to the next phase of my life. I took a photo of the letter on the kitchen table, with the sunlight hitting just right. I thought about showing Mom first. Maybe she'd smile, say she was proud. She didn't. "Well," she said, folding the letter neatly like a bill, "at least it's not community college." Dad didn't even look up from his laptop. "You'll need to handle the paperwork yourself. We're not co-signing anything." I blinked. "Wait, you're not helping with tuition?" Dad sighed as if I'd asked for a sports car. "Emma, we've done what we could. Your sister got scholarships. Maybe you should have thought about that." I stood there with the letter in my hand and a hollow pit in my chest. Olivia's acceptance to Stanford had been a family affair. There was a champagne toast in our living room, balloons, a handmade banner that read "Go Cardinal" in bold red. I remember Mom buying 3 different outfits just to look presentable at Olivia's send-off brunch. Mine? Just a folded letter and a list of what they wouldn't do. Later that week, I overheard Olivia on the phone with one of her friends. I had just walked past the hallway when I caught her laugh, low and sharp. "She's Portland bound," she said. "How fitting." I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't need to. Grandpa George was the only one who responded differently. He mailed me a card with a little folded $100 check inside. The card read, "Use this for something you'll remember." Tucked behind the check was a note in his handwriting. "Don't let them shrink your story. Stretch it yourself." I held on to that like a compass. A few weeks before I moved out, we had a family BBQ. Not for me, just one of Dad's summer traditions. It was warm, early August. The backyard smelled like grilled ribs and citronella candles. Olivia floated from guest to guest like a politician, smooth and practiced. Dad bragged about her internship at some think tank in D.C. Me, I was manning the cooler. No one introduced me. Not once did I hear, "This is our younger daughter, Emma." A few people nodded politely, mistaking me for one of Olivia's friends or the help. I tried to smile anyway. Jamie called around sunset. She was going to be my roommate in the dorms. We hadn't met yet, just email and one FaceTime, but her voice felt like a lifeline. "You packed yet?" she asked. "Not really," I said, twisting the cap off a soda. "Still feels like I haven't actually left." There was a pause. Then she said, "Leaving doesn't always mean walking out. Sometimes it's deciding not to stay." That night, after the guests had gone and the kitchen was clean, I stood in front of the family photo wall. Olivia's graduation portrait was front and center. She looked perfect. Hair curled, dress crisp, smile wide. My high school photo was nowhere, not even a printout from the yearbook. I walked back to my room, closed the door softly, and opened my laptop. The family group chat had been quiet lately, mostly Mom posting holiday sales or Olivia's articles. I stared at it for a minute. Then I hit Leave Group. It didn't even ask me if I was sure. I opened a tab and pulled up the Federal Student Aid site. My hands were shaking slightly as I clicked through the application. I listed myself as the sole financial contributor. I filled out the tuition estimate. I signed my name. When the confirmation screen blinked back at me, I didn't cry. I thought I would. But there was just a stillness, like something settling into place. Later that night, I wrote Grandpa George a letter. Dear Grandpa, thanks for the card and the check. I used it to buy a little desk lamp and a coffee maker. I think that counts as something I'll remember. Next time we talk, I hope I'll be someone they can't ignore. I watered myself with doubt and still managed to bloom. That line came to me on a Tuesday morning, somewhere between washing the espresso machine and taping a motivational quote above my cluttered desk. It wasn't poetic, really, just true. By then, truth had become my only reliable fuel. After moving into my first Portland apartment in the fall of 2017, the city felt bigger than I expected. Not in the skyline or traffic kind of way, but in how many people passed me without knowing my name. That kind of invisibility, strangely, was freeing. Jamie and I lived in a shoebox 2-bedroom on the east side close to campus. We shared a fridge, a constant rotation of mismatched mugs, and one space heater that groaned like an old man in the winter. Our furniture was mostly curbside finds, except for the IKEA table we assembled at midnight with 3 screws left over. It wobbled, but it was ours. I worked the night shift at a local coffee shop. Long hours, low pay, but decent tips. By day, I studied human-centered design. Between classes and caffeine, I tried to make sense of how the world worked and how I might fit into it. One evening, while unpacking a box I'd left sealed for over a year, I found the little leather notebook Grandpa George had given me when I was 12. Its edges were worn soft, like the corners of a blanket pulled too many times. On the first page, in pencil, was the sentence I'd written back then. One day, I'll speak louder than their silence. Below it, in Grandpa's blocky handwriting, a note I'd never noticed before. One day, you'll use this to rewrite the story. I ran my thumb over the ink and sat still for a long moment. I didn't cry. I just felt ready. A few weeks later, after another night of pouring lattes and restocking muffin baskets, I missed my stop on the bus home. I was so tired, I hadn't noticed. When I got off and started the extra 2 blocks to the apartment, rain soaked through my hoodie. My shoes squeaked. I remember watching my breath curl into the air and thinking, maybe it's time to stop guessing what's wrong with me and just ask. Jamie had been nudging me gently for months. You lose your phone more than my dad loses his glasses, she said once, tossing me my keys from under the couch. You don't need fixing. You just need a map. That winter, I made an appointment with the campus clinic. After several sessions and some testing, I got a diagnosis I hadn't even known I'd been carrying all my life. ADHD, predominantly inattentive type. It wasn't a revelation, it was a relief. Finally, there was a name for the tangled way my brain spun itself into knots over deadlines, forgotten passwords, and misplaced ID cards. The medication helped, sort of. The first few weeks were rough, nausea, sleepless nights, a weird humming in my chest. But slowly, my thoughts felt less like tangled yarn and more like threads I could gather. Maya, a classmate from my psychology elective, noticed me fiddling with a broken pen one day and said, "You look like you need a reset button." I laughed. She smiled and added, "Or at least someone to talk to who doesn't grade your homework." She gave me the number of a therapist she swore by. I went. I kept going. Around the same time, Jamie pushed a flyer onto our fridge. Summer internship, UX design at Lumina Tech. I scoffed. They'll never pick me. She rolled her eyes. Maybe not, but they definitely won't if you don't apply. She helped me polish my resume. Carlos, my coworker at the coffee shop, taught me how to mock up prototypes on his old tablet. "You've got the eye," he said one night while we closed. "Just need the guts." We stayed late that evening, experimenting with color palettes and typefaces, laughing over fonts with ridiculous names. He showed me how to present an idea, not just create it. I watched, learned, copied, then created something of my own. I submitted my application just before the deadline, hands shaking, heart thudding like I'd set something in motion I couldn't take back. The waiting was agony. To stay distracted, I did something that felt absurdly normal. I baked Jamie a birthday cake, not from a box. I found a recipe online, chocolate ganache with raspberry jam. The kitchen was a mess. Flour in my hair, frosting under my nails, a cracked egg on the floor. But when Jamie came home and saw the lopsided masterpiece, she gasped and said, "You didn't have to do this." "I know," I replied, placing a single candle on top. "But I wanted to." That night, we ate cake on the couch, wrapped in thrifted blankets, watching a terrible rom-com on mute while adding our own dialogue. For the first time in years, I felt what I can only describe as enoughness, not because of who I came from, but because of who I was becoming. A week later, I was walking home in the rain again. No umbrella this time, no hoodie, just a grocery bag and a weird sense that the air was clearer than usual. My phone buzzed. It was an email from Luminatech. Subject, "Congratulations." For a moment, I stood there, letting the rain soak through my shirt, not moving. Then I laughed out loud. No one around, no one to witness it but the parked cars and the blinking crosswalk. But it was real. For once, I didn't feel cold. That night, a card was waiting in the mailbox. A cream-colored envelope, my name written in tight, careful cursive. Inside, a message from Grandpa George. "Come to my 80th. Just one dance with your old man." I told myself I was going for Grandpa. That was true, but not the whole truth. The envelope sat on my fridge for weeks, held up by a magnet shaped like a cow. Cream cardstock, gold lettering, RSVP card tucked inside. Grandpa George's handwriting had been scrawled beneath the printed invite. "Just one dance with your old man. Please." That part stuck. I hadn't set foot near a Walker family gathering in nearly 10 years. No holiday dinners, no weddings, not even a text on Mother's Day. The thought of walking back into that world made my chest ache in old, familiar ways. But the thought of saying no to Grandpa George, that was worse. On the drive to the event hall, I rehearsed my reasons. I'm here for him. I'll stay for an hour. I'll avoid Dad. I'll dodge any passive-aggressive remarks from Mom. It's just a party. The parking lot was fuller than I expected. SUVs, minivans, a few sedans with dusty, proud grandparent bumper stickers. I pulled into a space near the back and sat there for a minute, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My hair was neatly pinned, my lipstick subtle. I looked like someone's professional niece, not the girl who'd left this town with a suitcase and 1,000 reasons not to return. Inside, the event hall was decorated in soft creams and golds. Paper lanterns hung from the ceiling. Buffet tables stretched along the back wall, heavy with ribs, deviled eggs, potato salad, and mini cheesecakes arranged in a spiral. A jazz trio played something mellow in the corner. I spotted cousins I hadn't seen in years. Sarah, now with 2 toddlers clinging to her dress, and Dave, still in tech, still wearing ironic t-shirts under blazers. And then there was Grandpa. He stood near the entrance, pinning a boutonniere to his lapel with shaking fingers. When he saw me, his face lit up like the 4th of July. "Emma!" he called out, arms wide. I crossed the floor quickly and hugged him tight. "You look like you," he whispered, voice gruff with emotion. "A little taller, maybe." "You're shrinking," I teased, brushing off imaginary lint from his shoulder. He chuckled. "Fair point." I offered to help with his boutonniere. As I pinned it straight, I caught him studying me closely. "I was worried you wouldn't come," he said softly. "I almost didn't." "But you did." We stood there in a quiet moment that felt like forgiveness. Guests began to trickle in around us, and before long, the room buzzed with chatter and clinking glasses. A few relatives did double takes when they saw me. Some came up with surprised smiles, others offered the kind of nod you give when you're unsure if someone wants to be acknowledged. It wasn't until I reached the coffee station that I heard his voice. "Emma." I turned. Dad stood there in a crisp blazer, the same color as his mood. Behind him, Mom hovered like a second shadow. Her hands clutched a designer clutch so tightly her knuckles were pale. "You could have warned us," Dad said, voice low but sharp. I reached for the iced tea pitcher, filling my glass slowly. Warned you I was coming to my own grandfather's birthday. He frowned. It's been almost a decade. People will ask questions. Then tell them I'm doing well. Mom stepped in, voice slightly breathless. It's not that simple, sweetheart. Some folks don't even know about the situation. The situation? I raised an eyebrow. She glanced around, then leaned in. We've told people you were focused on your career, abroad. I took a sip of my tea. My hand trembled just slightly against the cold glass. I steadied it with my other hand. You lied, I said quietly. Dad's jaw tightened. We managed things the way we saw fit. I didn't respond, not immediately. I let the silence stretch, as if maybe in the quiet they'd hear what they never had before. Mom's voice cracked. We just wish you had given us time to prepare. This is a big day, for all of us. I looked at her then. Her expensive watch caught the light. Her dress was perfect. Her face looked tired. I'm not here to ruin anything, I said evenly. I'm here for Grandpa. Dad's eyes narrowed. You should leave before people ask questions we don't want to answer. There it was. The truth laid bare. It wasn't about me at all. It never had been. It was about their image, their story, their narrative without the messiness of me in it. I looked past them toward the stage. A microphone stood on the podium. Grandpa had mentioned speeches, toasts. I stepped around them without another word. The room was warmer now, more crowded. Voices overlapped, laughter in bursts. The jazz trio had shifted to something more upbeat. Grandpa caught my eye from across the room. He started to smile, but then saw my face, saw something shift in me, and his smile faded, not entirely, but just enough. I made my way toward the podium, not the exit. I'd never raised my voice in that family, not once, until that day. As I walked toward the podium, the chatter around the room began to fade, not because people noticed me yet, but because my own pulse was louder than anything else. I could hear it in my ears, behind my eyes, in the soles of my feet. I took the long way around the dance floor, passing the buffet, the clinking glasses, the cousins deep in conversation. Then I saw her, Cousin Beth. Years ago, when I was 13, she'd leaned over at a barbecue and whispered to another girl, "That's Olivia's weird sister." I hadn't forgotten. Today she looked up, saw me, and, God help me, nodded. A warm, human nod. I didn't know what that meant, but maybe it meant I wasn't invisible anymore. I stepped up to the mic, tapped my glass gently. It rang out, a high, clean note. The kind of sound you only get from real crystal. The music stopped. A few heads turned. Then more. The room settled into an expectant hush. I didn't wait. "Hi," I said. My voice echoed more than I expected. "I won't take long." I glanced at Grandpa George, who sat near the front, his boutonniere slightly askew. His eyes were on me. Not blinking, not judging, just seeing. "I want to start by saying thank you," I said, "to Grandpa, for inviting me, for always inviting me, even when I didn't show, for being the only one who clapped when I played the tree in the 5th grade play." A soft laugh rippled through the room. "You never forgot me," I said, looking straight at him. Then I turned back to the crowd. "Some of you may be wondering where I've been all these years." A pause. You could hear the air conditioning kick on. "So I'll tell you." I saw Mom freeze at her table, wine glass in hand. Dad's jaw tensed. Somewhere across the room, a fork clinked against a plate. I left because it hurt too much to stay. I left because being told you're a disappointment again and again starts to feel like truth. I left because I needed to find out who I was without their version of me. I could feel the room shift, chairs squeaking, someone coughing awkwardly. I went to Portland State. No, it wasn't an Ivy. No, there wasn't a scholarship dinner. But I worked. 2 jobs, some semesters. I took out loans. I ate dollar store ramen. I cried a lot, but I also made friends who became family. I found out I have ADHD. I learned how my brain works, finally, and I got help. I started over. From the back corner, my phone buzzed once. I'd left it propped up against the dessert tower. On the screen, Jamie appeared on FaceTime, silent, mouthing the words, "You got this." I'm now a UX designer at a startup I helped build from the ground up. I lead a team, I mentor interns, I pay my own bills, and I bake cakes from scratch, I added with a smile. Scattered laughs. Nervous, maybe, but real. I looked at my parents then. Really looked. Mom's eyes were glassy. Her napkin was clenched in her lap, a red wine stain spreading like a secret. Dad checked his watch. And in all that time, I said slowly, not once did they call. Not once did they ask if I needed help or how I was doing. Not once did they say, "We're proud of you." Silence again. Even the jazz trio looked unsure of whether to resume. I felt the words coming. The ones I hadn't known were waiting. "You called me a failure," I said, voice steady, "but I built a life without you. And now that it's whole, you want to cut a piece?" There it was. No shout, no cry, just truth. A long moment passed. Then Grandpa George stood. His napkin fluttered to the floor. He raised his glass, voice rich with age and clarity. "To Emma," he said, "who didn't just survive, she became." It took a second. Then people clapped. Hesitantly at first, then more confidently. Some relatives stood, some didn't. A few came over with watery smiles, patting my arm. Cousin Sarah hugged me. Dave offered a fist bump. Mom didn't move. Dad turned away. But for the first time, their silence didn't shrink me. It freed me. I didn't need closure. I needed a mirror to see how far I'd come. The first morning of the new year, I stood in my Seattle apartment, coffee in hand, staring at the framed job offer letter that hung just to the right of the kitchen. "Welcome to Evermark Solutions," it read. UX lead, Emma Walker. It had been a year, but I still paused to look at it now and then, especially on quiet mornings like this, when the only sound was the hum of the fridge and the soft buzz of a phone vibrating on the counter. The fridge was cluttered now, something old me would have hated. Sticky notes, postcards from Jamie's cross-country road trip, a hand-drawn birthday card from Carlos's niece, a photo booth strip of Maya and me making ridiculous faces, and in the bottom corner, the last Christmas card Grandpa George had sent, just a drawing of a chessboard and the words, "Queen takes center." No family portraits, no reminders of who I used to be to them. That absence felt like peace. My phone buzzed again. I picked it up. 5 new emails. One stood out. Subject, from Mom. It had been sitting there for a week, unopened. I hadn't rushed to it. There was no urgency anymore. But today, I tapped it open. It was long. Too long. She wrote about how she'd been going to therapy, about how she and Dad were raised in households that measured love through grades, trophies, and polished reputations, how they passed that same lens down without realizing it crushed one child while inflating the other. She admitted they had favored Olivia, that she hadn't known how to mother someone she didn't understand, that it had taken my speech and the silence after it to wake something in her. She said she regretted not showing up for me. She said sorry. I read every word. Then I archived the email. I didn't reply. I didn't need her to know I saw it, just like I didn't need to explain why I wouldn't be responding. That kind of permission no longer belonged to her. Later that day, Olivia texted, "Olivia, so I guess now you're the center of attention. Congrats, no. Hi, no warmth. Just sharp words dressed up as commentary. I stared at the message for 5 seconds. Then I blocked the number and smiled. A week later, Grandpa George came up for lunch. It had become our little tradition. Every month or so, he'd take the Amtrak up from Portland, and we'd split a grilled cheese sandwich and a bowl of tomato soup at a small diner near my office. He never asked for much, never commented on how I decorated. He just showed up and made the place feel warmer. We sat by the window as Seattle's gray skies flickered with winter light. After we finished our meal, he leaned back and asked, "Do you forgive them?" His tone wasn't loaded. He didn't nudge or coach, just asked. I stirred my tea and said, "I forgave myself." That's what mattered. He nodded once. That's enough. We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to. When I got home that night, I pulled the old leather notebook from the shelf. It was faded now, softened by years and stories and tears. On the first page, "One day I'll speak louder than their silence." Below that, "One day you'll use this to rewrite the story." And then another note, one I'd written recently. "Tell your version." I flipped to the last page, wrote in big, bold letters, "I made it and I'm not sharing the credit." The next morning, I printed a photo. Me standing in front of my office building, arms wide open, hair wild in the wind. I taped it inside an envelope, added a sticky note, "See you next month," and mailed it to Grandpa George. That evening, I went up to the rooftop of my apartment building. The city glowed in soft blues and silvers, like it hadn't quite decided whether to sleep or stay awake. I sat on the ledge, the old notebook in my lap, the wind threading through my hair. No music, no applause, no one watching. But I was there. I had arrived. Even after all these years, standing on that rooftop with the wind in my hair and the old notebook in my hand reminded me, healing doesn't always look like a hug. Sometimes it looks like choosing peace over proof. Families don't always get it right, and love, when withheld, can bruise deeper than we admit. But self-forgiveness is the root of any real repair. If we learn to accept our own story, we no longer need others to write a better ending for us. If this story stirred something in you, feel free to share your thoughts. Someone out there might need to hear that they're not alone either.